The Revenant is based on a true story of legendary explorer Hugh Glass's life. This video intends to detail his historic encounter with a grizzly bear that would go on to brutally maul him in a manner so gruesome that even reading about the event had many shuddering in their boots. His infamous story is to this date known as not only one of the most remarkable accounts of unyielding human perseverance, but one that's also widely regarded as being amongst the most incredible tales ever told, period. Long before the days of gunslinging cowboys, there were mountain men roaming the West. These adventurous souls lived a legendary existence in pursuit of beaver pelts and other furs. One such real-life folk hero was none other than renowned explorer Hugh Glass. Glass's mysterious origins have long been a puzzle. As an example, we know that he was born around the year 1783, near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. But exactly when and where is difficult to pinpoint. Born into poverty, Glass sought out the opportunity to make a living by trading furs with American Indian tribes of South Dakota and Wyoming. He would eventually earn a job with the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, and during this time he quickly became an expert woodsman, and was also known as one of the first white men to traverse many of the regions he explored. In addition to his long list of accolades, Glass was furthermore a capable sailor, ranger, hunter, and fur trapper. He would move to Missouri at the age of 25 and embark on several expeditions in the area, accruing an impressive amount of knowledge about survival from his travels. And to further add on to his resume, Glass also gained a reputation for being a formidable fighter and brave bear hunter amongst the native tribes in Missouri during his time there. A few years later, he would quickly become known as one of the most intrepid explorers of the era, often wandering off on solo excursions beyond the map boundaries of West America to go where few dared to venture. It was during one of these very travels that Glass would encounter a grizzly bear and would live to tell a tale which would later go down in history. By around late August or early September of 1823, expedition leader Andrew Henry and his remaining 15 men were well up the Grand River Valley. Glass, in his role as a hired hunter, was some distance from the group, searching for game along the brushy river bottom, when he suddenly encounters a grizzly sow with 2 cubs. Before he could react, the bear charges at Glass and viciously mauls him, sinking its teeth and claws deep into his back, thighs, buttocks, and torso, all in an attempt, of course, to neutralize what she perceived as a threat to her offspring. Hearing Glass's cries for help, several crew members rush to Glass and without hesitation kill the bear on sight. Despite gruesome injuries including several broken bones, torn flesh, and gashes all over his chest, arms, and face, Glass manages to survive until the morning, although expedition leader Henry and most of the other veteran trappers were certain that he wouldn't make it. With hostile Indians from the Arikara tribe in their vicinity, the men decide against camping out and instead load Glass onto a litter and continue on for 2 days through the thick wilderness. With 2 groups of men traveling at different paces, Henry was in a tricky situation. He knew that if he kept his party moving quickly, Glass wouldn't get the honorable burial that he deserved. On the other hand, if the crew stays with him to bury him, they risked being caught by the hostile Arikara tribe. Henry offers an $80 bonus to any brave souls who would stay behind with Glass for his final days. Henry's promise of a monetary reward was enough to convince 2 brave souls to join him in the unknown. One man, veteran woodsman John Fitzgerald, had years of exploration and survival skills under his belt, and the other man was 19-year-old first-time expeditioner James Bridger. It's important to note that the original account of this incident, written by James Hall and published in 1825, does not name either of these 2 men as volunteers. However, 3 earlier accounts of Glass's story document the name of the older man as John Fitzgerald. Even after 5 days without food or proper medical care, Hugh was still visibly breathing and making eye movements. But despite this, Fitzgerald feared that they were in danger of being discovered by the Arikara Indian, and that watching over Glass any longer could prove costly. And so Fitzgerald takes matters into his own hands and thereby makes an executive decision. Immediately agreeing with Fitzgerald, thanks once again to his veteran status, Bridger quickly helps him settle Glass's pallet next to a flowing spring, so as to not leave behind anything which might point back at them being there. Before leaving him for dead, the men would also strip Glass's person of his gun, knife, tomahawk, and fire-making kit, items for which they believed a dead man had no need. Sometime later, Glass awakens to the realization that he'd been abandoned by his companions. Not only was he unable to walk, but with no survival equipment, and not to mention the severity of his injuries, he also knew he had little chance of making it out alive. As the emotions of his crew's betrayal fuel his arm muscles, Glass forcefully summons up the little energy he has and begins the slow, grueling crawl back towards civilization, determined not only to survive, but with vengeance in the forefront of his mind. With only the clothes on his back, a bearskin hide, and no weapons or supplies in sight, Glass found himself alone, stranded in the South Dakota wilderness, with 200 miles separating him from his destination at Fort Kiowa. Meanwhile, and unbeknownst to Glass of course, Fitzgerald and Bridger catch up with the trapping party, where they report that Glass has died. With a broken leg, Glass binds himself the best he could and uses the Thunder Butte, a 2,700-foot high steep-sided hill, as a navigation aid. Eating berries, snakes, and even insects for sustenance along the way, Glass's fortunes would finally take a turn for the better when he suddenly comes across a pack of wolves devouring a freshly killed buffalo calf. He quickly hides in some bushes, and after waiting for the wolves to finish their share and retreat, he manages to scavenge a good amount of meat from the carcass, allowing him to finally set up camp for what was at this point a top priority for him: crucial recovery time for the multiple injuries that ailed his body. In order to treat one of the major wounds around his leg, Glass reluctantly allows maggots to feed off the decaying flesh in the area, a method used by medical practitioners in many parts of the world, even today. The few days spent recovering at camp allows Glass's body enough sufficient rest to allow him to continue his journey south at a much faster rate than he'd prior been able to. And so, with this increased pace, his journey finally brings him to the Missouri River. By either lucking his way into acquiring a boat through some friendly Lakota natives, or single-handedly constructing one himself, Glass would finally manage to make his way downstream and reach his intended destination at Fort Kiowa come mid-October, which was approximately 6 weeks after him and his crew had initially set out on the expedition. It's also worth noting that had Glass's expedition begun even a month later than it did, the harsh winter conditions would have drastically reduced his chances, especially considering the massive injuries he'd sustained. Upon reaching civilization again, Glass takes advantage of being part of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, and thus manages to acquire much-needed supplies and equipment, including a rifle and gunpowder, at credit from a local trading post. And upon replenishing his inventory, he sets off once more in his quest for revenge against the men who betrayed him. After yet another lengthy journey, Glass eventually stumbles upon Bridger at the mouth of Bighorn River. The 19-year-old breaks down in tears upon being confronted by Glass and goes on to explain how repentant he was for what he'd done, further elaborating that Fitzgerald was the one who initially made the call and that he'd felt obliged to follow his lead, considering his veteran status. Deeming his apology as genuine, Glass thereby forgives Bridger and sets off to find the man he now considered to be the real villain. After yet another intensive search, Glass finally arrives at Fort Atkinson in what is now Nebraska, and finally manages to track down Fitzgerald. Right as he was about to take justice in his own hands, Glass's plans to exact revenge would be foiled by a US Army captain, who'd in very timely fashion interjected what was undoubtedly going to be a fight to the death. The captain served Glass a firm reminder that murdering a United States soldier would be punishable by death. Although Glass was ultimately disappointed with this outcome, he would eventually accept a $300 compensation for the unbelievable hardships he'd endured, before swiftly making it off into history, never to be seen or heard from again.